Gabriela Kemp, welcome. I suppose that I should start off by a massive congratulations to the Lisbon inaugural conference that IESBA had. Clearly, I think a very good attempt to make IESBA visible. And also the firm culture and governance topic that was very topical for the day. Good contributions. I did actually attend online, so I did follow a lot of the proceedings for the day. So massive congratulations on that. We have had our IESBA preparation session earlier, where we also received a report from Janine, who was the observer for the then meetings that following the conference. And we will be hearing a bit more, I guess, from you also in terms of the updates on the special strategic work plan issues that you are holding. And then also the update from the June meeting in terms of progress to date. So let me, without any further ado, just hand over to you, Gabriela and Ken, to take us through the update that you have for us on your broad projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tego, and good afternoon or good morning or good evening to all the PIOB members and observers. Thank you very much once again for this opportunity to update the PIOB. And first of all, Tego, even if I had already had the opportunity to congratulate you on this new role, of course, today I wanted to do it publicly and tell you that, of course, you should count on us to support you when necessary and to make the public interest advance. Thank you very much for accepting the position, which is not an easy one, and we recognize that. And secondly, thank you very much for the congratulations on the conference. Yes, it was a massive event, much more relevant than I was expecting, than we were expecting. It was a big effort, but I think it was worth, because it put an incredible number of people discussing ethics. It's not about the IESBA itself, it's about how ethics and independence is being put on the agenda of so many people, and it was very surprising, to say the least, to see some people saying in public that ethics is extremely important. Now it's a matter of putting it in practice. So, and that's the topic of our conversation today. Tego, you mentioned a number of topics. So in the leadership call that we had agreed to speak about firm culture and governance mostly, and then a slide just touched upon private equity and the new projects that we are initiating. But of course, I'll be fully ready to respond to any questions or speak about any other topics that you may deem necessary or interesting, namely about the strategy that we are adopting. So I don't know, should I share the slides, or is someone taking care of the slides? Okay, thank you very much. I see the slides. Ken is with me. I don't see him.
Yeah,
I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. And if you allow me, Chair, if necessary, I will hand over to Ken for some details if necessary. So the agenda for next slide, I think you can go immediately to slide 3 to save time. Or slide 4. Chair, I will start with firm culture and governance, and then you'll tell me if you want to stop for some questions, or if I should make the presentation and drive it to the end and then receive questions. Of course, I'll let you manage. So on firm culture and governance, just a brief recap about what has been decided by the IESBA over time. And I think this is important because there has been some confusion in the market. So we started the work in early 2024. This was in our strategy and work plan. This was brought to us by many stakeholders, or some stakeholders, and it was upon some internal reflection about the need to address these topics on top of the ethics, the existing ethics and independence standards, which address more individual behaviors. So I'm not going to go back about the reasons. I spoke about that many times with the PIOB. But during 2024, we have done a lot of research, outreach, fact-finding, reflections, and etc. And at the end of 2024, December 2024, The working group submitted the report, which was approved by the board, and made a recommendation or proposal to the board to start 2 projects on farm culture and governance, one to develop a framework, the other one to develop non-authoritative material. Again, I don't like the word because it does not necessarily address or cover everything that we want to do, but I'll leave it like this for now for a matter of simplicity. So this was what we decided in December 2024. And the plan was to issue an exposure draft in December 2025 of the framework of standards that we would be developing. The work started in early 2025 or even in 2024, but amidst a great and intense and important conversation and reflection that we held internally about the IESBA strategy and the way we were developing standards, the way we were communicating, the way we were engaging with stakeholders, embedding feedback, etc., and some difficulties expressed by the market about the speed of change. We made 2 fundamental decisions. One, to adjust or refresh our general strategy in doing the work of standard setting, and another one which reflects this broader strategy to resequence the work on farm culture and governance. And the word resequence was carefully selected not to allow any confusion or misunderstanding, but apparently we need to clarify further. So initially we had decided to develop standards and do some NAM, focusing first on the standards with a view to publish, issue an exposure draft by the end of 2025. And in June, what the board decided was to resequence, focus first on NAM, or you call it what you want, something that it's not standards, some materials to make our stakeholders better understand what we had in mind and to make ourselves collect deeper and more extended information that we needed to make decisions. And then we decided that in June 2026, 1 year after, we will resume the decision that we had made to develop a standard or a set of standards or a framework, let's put it like this, and upon the information that we will collect, the engagement with stakeholders that we will hopefully put in place on the basis of the viewpoints that we are developing, and further reflection, we will by then decide what this framework will look like. If it's going to be a set of standards, if it's going to be one very simple standard, and if it's going to be something outside the code, a standalone document. So we have options, and we have not yet made a decision about what this framework is going to be. There is only one option, I would say, that it's not on the table, which is not to do anything. And it's not because we decided before to do it, but because the more we go and learn and collect information and speak with people and stakeholders, the more it is our conviction that there is a lot to be done in this space. How much we are going to do and in which formats, that's something to be decided in June 2026. So we did not drop the plan to develop a framework. We are going to decide what kind of framework, what kind of material, product, output we will develop in June 2026. So sorry for this long clarification, but there is a lot of confusion in the market. So I had a conversation with Tom last week, and even the IESBA seemed to be confused. So I promised to everywhere I go, make sure that this is clear. And this promise will be translated in a document that we are developing to make everything clear in this respect. So next slide, please. So with this, what we decided, or the discussion in the September board meeting was based on these viewpoints that we are developing. The viewpoints are, so to speak, as the name says, that the views of the IESBA about each one of the elements identified in the report, and which are listed in this slide and that I have already spoken about. And the purpose of these viewpoints, it's not to be a product in itself. It's not an end in itself. It's not a product. They are instrumental. They are a tool to allow us to better engage with stakeholders with more clarity, which for their simplicity would and will hopefully allow stakeholders to understand what we have in mind. It's not a product. It's a tool to get somewhere, and the somewhere where we want to go is June 2026, informed by all the interactions with our stakeholders, conversations, dialogue, and etc. So in September, there was a lot of discussions around these viewpoints. Janine was there, and I'm sure that she briefed the PIOB board. There are still some members who think that they are too prescriptive, others who think that they don't have enough force and that the level should be a little bit raised. So there are some mixed feelings about the level at which they were currently drafted. We are working on these viewpoints with a view to develop draft principles. So they will look like principles for December 2025 for the IESBA board to discuss and possibly agree on these draft principles, which will again be used to engage with stakeholders. We are also developing this contextual piece that I mentioned to explain the purpose of these viewpoints, to make clear to everyone that they are not a product, at least for the time being. They can be in the future, depending on the decisions that we will make, but for the time being, they are not being developed with that objective. So this will be explained in this contextual piece. And there will be an overarching viewpoint which will combine or, so to speak, make consistent all the viewpoints and start giving the idea of what a framework or something could be in the future. This is the work that we are developing right now. And for December, we expect to have the draft principles based on the viewpoints, this overarching element that I have just mentioned. Next slide, please. So as you see here in this slide, it's mentioned that viewpoints are not a tool and not a final product. So there was some suggestions from the board that we should have more illustrative, that these viewpoints should be more illustrative and should have some cases and stories and etc. Not everyone is in agreement with that, so we are going to need to strike a balance between these proposals, and above all, we want these viewpoints to be an instrument to also to start incentivizing ethical behavior within the firms and nudge the firms mostly, but also regulators, about the needs for the need of this culture and governance to be something relevant, important, and effective material in the firms. Next slide, please. There was an important discussion. So there was an overall support for this preliminary plan. I want to be clear about we are in a very preliminary phase of this work. So in December, hopefully, there will be something more concrete. We are trying to accommodate the board comments in terms of the level at which these principles or these draft principles are drafted, make them more consistent across the 8 viewpoints and etc. Clarify the messages about the linkages with ISQM1. It's also work that we are going to develop to try to be as clear as possible in respect to the differences between the two things and the guarantee that one will not impact the other. And we discussed the possibility of field testing, and field testing is an option that it's in our due process. The standard setting due process includes this possibility of field testing. We discussed a few possibilities, a pilot or something like that. The board mostly considered that it is too soon, and of course there are always these reactions of something new because apparently we never did it. It might be interesting to field test. We are aware of the difficulties that this would involve. Still to be seen if we are going to do anything along these lines once these draft principles are more advanced and more robust. So I think that this is, next slide, please. Okay, this is all on firm culture and governance. Of course, happy to respond to any questions, but I think that the most important thing was to update the PIOB of where we are, what our intentions are, and what our intentions are not, because again there was some confusion in the market. So I don't know, Chair, if you want me to stop here or if you want me to move forward and all the questions will be made afterwards.
Yes, Gabriela, I think let's just have a quick pause because I saw Dave's hand go up, so that we allow board members to weigh in, and then we can move on to the next, the section that we're going into next, the private equity. Dave, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and Gabriela, thanks for the presentation and the summary. It was very helpful. I just have a couple of questions with respect to the viewpoints, and one's a clarification, and then the other will be on the field testing issue. I guess I'm still not 100% clear what the purpose of the viewpoints are. Are they to express a view of IESBA to the world that these are the important elements within the different categories, or is it a way to elicit, like an invitation to comment or a consultation to elicit feedback from stakeholders on, what some of the things you've considered, but what, how do they react to that, and how do they see that in the context of IESBA and your role in standard setting and providing guidance and that sort of thing. So, and it may be the answer to that question may impact the second point on field testing. I think field testing is incredibly important. I think there's a lot of information that can be gathered in that process. I know there's concerns that if you're field testing with practitioners, that they may have a negative bias, but I would encourage you to have an open mind with respect to that, because I think there's a lot that can be learned through that field testing process that will help with any unintended consequences of any final project that you decide to come up with. So really just a question of clarification and then a comment on field testing. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Dave. Board members, are there any other viewpoints to advance to Gabriela, or can we allow Gabriela to respond to Dave and then we see if somebody will join in? Thanks, Gabriela. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Dave. So to your first question, Dave, I think that the answer is probably both. So these viewpoints were born from a hot discussion that we had internally after during the June board meeting, because some stakeholders were saying that they were not understanding what we meant with this project, what we had in mind, why this was necessary, what we were aiming at, and etc. So in June, we also made the commitment, namely through this SMART framework that we created, but not only, to be clear, to be simple, to be responsive, to be targeted, all these things. And we thought that we needed to do something to allow stakeholders to better understand what we wanted with this project. We discussed many possibilities, but one thing that we had in mind is that whatever we were going to develop for that purpose, that tool, that initiative, had to be simple, very short, not burdensome, not complex, not long, etc. So the idea of these viewpoints were born from this need that we felt of having, in a very, very simple way, something to give to stakeholders and say, look, this is what we think. We think that these 8 topics are important. They were already on the report, so there was nothing new there. We just picked the 8 elements and tried, and we are trying, because the work is not final. We are trying with these viewpoints to explain a little bit better why they matter and what could be the seed for each one of them of a principle, or something else. But we also understand that this needs to be tested, and even if it's not field testing, I like the word testing, because the idea was not just to satisfy stakeholders, but really for us to be able to extract from our conversations with stakeholders something meaningful. And some of these elements may be less relevant or not necessary because they are just already achieved by any other ways, or there can be some difficulties with their implementation, or they may need some kind of proportionality, or they may be deemed so important and so relevant that we really conclude that we need to do something around it. So whatever the conclusions will be, we needed something simple, immediately accessible, which would not force stakeholders to read 70 pages to try to understand what we wanted. It's an instrument, it's a tool. Now, so it's both, David. It's on the one hand, it's really something to it, but it can be the seeds, and it should be the seeds of these draft principles. Then will become something depending on the evolution in June 2026. Now, on field testing, it was Janine observed the discussion. It was an important discussion. I myself, I am a fan of the idea of field testing, but I acknowledge and had to admit that there are some difficulties and questions on the way. First, we cannot test something which is not yet robust and final, not final, but it's not in a stage where we can test them. So we deferred that decision anyway for December. But anyway, field testing requires a lot of things. It requires resources on the one hand, some knowledge that we may not have, so we may think about how to do it, but above all, it requires the firms or regulators or the PAOs to volunteer to field tests. And that can be really per se an objection to the field testing if we don't have anyone who have any firm, any PAO who has the willingness and the resources and etc. to help us field testing. So still to be seen. We have not dropped the plan, and I'm a fan myself of the plan. The way this can be done, if it's a pilot, if it's a hackathon, if it's any other way, a partnership with a PAO, many options on the table. Again, it's deferred to December when we have something more robust and more prepared to assess if this is possible or not.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Gabriela. I see Janine's hand is up. Janine?
You're mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Checo. Hello, Gabriela. Yes, there was a lot of good discussion on all these topics. I have a question on the linkage with ISQ1. It's a follow-up question of what was discussed at the meeting. Can you inform us about the current thinking on the way forward in terms of process with using maybe taking a few viewpoints or all, I don't know what your idea is, and how these would link to ISQ1 and what the process is, also the timing with towards December meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Here is one of the moments where I will probably ask Ken if he has something more details to share. But what I can tell you, Janine, is that the timing is as soon as possible. We are prioritizing the finalization for this purpose of the viewpoints, the overarching document, and the note about the purpose and the intention of these viewpoints. That's what's keeping us busy now, and this is going to be submitted to an interim board call that we will have in October, and the ISQM related document will follow. I don't have a clear idea about when we are going to be able to deliver this, but I tell you that it's a priority as well, because it becomes urgent to clarify something which is there, a lot of comments and doubts in the market and even internally that we need to clarify immediately, or as soon as possible. Now, the process, it's not established, but I think that the idea is to demonstrate the differences between what we want to do and what we want to achieve and the already existing ISQM1 on the one hand, and demonstrate that one will not overlap with the other, will not be redundant, and will not force any reopening of the ISQM1. There are differences which are very significant. First of all, and just to start, the Firm Culture and Governance project covers the firms in all its services. So all the accountants, not only auditors, and we are speaking about a proportion probably of 20 to 80 or 30 to 70, something like that. Auditors being the smaller portion. So it's a great majority of this community are accountants, but it's not only about the targeted people, it's about the nature and the objective of the project. This is about ethics and culture. This is not, this is about culture and governance and to drive ethical behavior, not anything which has to do with audit quality. And these two elements per se already, I think, can explain the difference between the two things and the non-intention and all the care that we are putting on making sure that one thing does not overlap with the other. Of course, the process will involve, and is already involving, a lot of connections with IESBA, and Tom is here, and Vili as well knows that. More than that, Janine, I think it would be very risky for me to say something else at this point in time, because the work has, I mean, we have a very, very basic draft from last year that we abandoned because we thought it was not going to be necessary, because it was obvious to us that it was not the same thing and there was no overlap. But given the lack of clarity, we will resume that work, which is for now basically a table, but that will be, of course, developed further. Ken, I don't know if you want to add anything relevant for this to respond to Janine, or if I said what is possible to say at this point in time.
No, I think you've covered most of it, Gabriela, and we are at this stage, Janine, currently focusing on really iterating the viewpoints to get them in shape for, first of all, our October virtual board call on October 24th. And that's going to be a springboard then to our December board discussion, which Gabriel explained earlier. The aim there for December is to have IESBA come to agreement, to agree the viewpoints as essentially articulations of the draft principles that we would envision to be part of the Firm Culture and Governance framework. Insofar as SQM1 is concerned, we are, of course, very well aware of the expectations and the need for clarity relative to the interaction with ISQM1. We are mindful that we need to be as responsive and as prompt as we can in coming up with an explanation as to the interaction, the linkage. We, at this point, until we have at least stabilized the viewpoints so that we can work with them and draw those linkages, at least at the conceptual level. Until we get to that point, we're not really in a position to put pen to paper. So we're really waiting to have at least two of the viewpoints stabilized, more or less, hopefully with the benefit of the October board call, and then developing at least a first draft, a first outline of how we conceptually see the linkage. At this point in time, this is how we looking at it at a conceptual level, as opposed to a detailed mapping of each and every line of our viewpoints against each of the requirements in ISQM1. Because as Gabriela says, the two documents are fundamentally very different. There is a degree of overlap, but they are fundamentally different in terms of the scope, in terms of the objectives of SQM1 versus the ethical culture and governance framework. So the project team has it on its work plan to try to put together a first outline of this articulation of this conceptual linkage for a first airing at our board in December. And then we will see where we go from there.
Thanks, Ken. I think, Gabriela, we can move on. I'm looking at the time that's left, and you still have got quite a few slides to cover. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, the next topics, if you allow me, I'll go a little bit faster, and then, of course, again, be ready for any questions you may have. So on private equity, and if you can move to the next slide, so it's just a brief recap of where we are. As you know, and we spoke about it, I think, in the last meeting in July with the PIOB, the IESBA issued staff alert. The staff alert basically identifies possible risks and threats arising from the private equity investment in accounting firms, both in terms of ethics and independence. They are clearly separated and addressed individually. What I wanted you to know is that, well, first, the work didn't stop here. So this is something that will be on our agenda, I suspect, for the next times very intensively. And even if we did not want our stakeholders that do not allow us to, to forget about this topic, because it's what's keeping everyone awake at night. Anyway, this staff alert was very impactful. As you can see from the slide, it's already the third most downloaded IESBA publication, with a significant number of downloads, unusual, a little bit unusual for the IESBA, which demonstrates the interest of the public in general on the topic. But we are continuing the work and the engagement. On the third quarter, there were a lot of engagements. I think that all of them, almost all of them, under request of the stakeholders. So it's taking its own life. People are asking us to speak about this. Very interestingly, with the stakeholder with whom, as far as I remember, who had never interacted, IAIS, the International Association of Insurance Services, or whatever, it's insurance industry, who were very, very much interested in this, and Ken and Linda made a presentation. So there is a lot of interest. Tomorrow I'll have a meeting here in Tokyo with the PIOB, with the IOSCO, and this is clearly one of the two topics that they want to speak about. It's private equity and firm culture and governance. Very much interested. In January, I'll be somewhere in Asia, Singapore, and etc., where they want desperately to speak about private equity. And Hong Kong. So it's really the topic of the moment, and it's really raising a lot of questions and a lot of possibilities, opportunities, risks that we need to address almost on a day-by-day basis. Ken, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you very much, Gabriel. I just wanted to maybe provide just a very quick bit of flavor in terms of our interactions with some of the regulatory stakeholders we have engaged with in the past few weeks, really. IESBA, ACRA from Singapore, and IAIS, which is the International Association of Insurance Supervisors. So just provide a bit of color. First of all, insofar as IESBA is concerned, they have established a private equity task force. They are moving with speed to try to, in effect, catch up with the developments, because they've been concerned that they are behind the curve. And in fact, there are a number of state boards who are in fact very concerned that they have not, simply because of this of the pace of those investments happening across the US. They've been very concerned that they have not been able to gather sufficient information in order to be able to make regulatory determinations as to whether they ought to permit those transactions to go forward. So that's a bit of a fear that they have in a number of the state boards, and I think at least 10 of those is what we heard. 10 of those states boards are going back to the Uniform Accountancy Act and revisiting the sort of ownership rules, etc., for the CPA firms. But that is a very concrete concern they have. when it comes to ACRA, in fact, in Appendix 2, we have provided you with at least some very high-level overview of some of the comments or questions they raised. Insofar as ACRA is concerned, without going into the various technical questions they raised, if I could summarize their questions were more technical in nature, because really, as they are looking into at least the early sort of transactions, the PE transactions that are happening in Singapore, and they are starting to happening. Those questions are bubbling up, and they are more technical in terms of the application, the independence requirements. How do you determine whether in fact network firms are being created, whether directors that are in the chain of ownership can be directors in the portfolio companies that the firm might take on as clients, as audit clients, how to interpret the concept of control that determines whether an entity that controls the firm is part of the firm. So these are rather technical questions that are focused in the independence area. Insofar as IES is concerned, we had an interaction with Gabriela in the margins of our board meeting in Lisbon, which Gabriela mentioned earlier. The concerns from the insurance supervisors are quite different. Not so much technical at this point, but really more looking at the big picture in terms of essentially transformation to the makeup of the firms, the environment, the cultural environment within the firms, and to put it quite bluntly as well, a lot of skepticism that they put across to us as to whether in fact what the firms are conveying out there in terms of the guardrails and in terms of the precautions they're taking, and some of the perceptions that or some of the realities that you shared with us, that the PE investors in fact are keeping quite a distance from the operations and the management of the firms. So there's a lot of skepticism really as to what the firms are messaging out there that they shared with us. There was in fact a real concern expressed as to whether this what's happening could lead to a potential audit failure sometime down the road, because they are seeing increasingly audit engagement partners having what they, to use literally their words, less skin in the game. Because if you think about how the partnership model has evolved over the years, from literally partners owning the firms to LLPs with a limited liability, and then private equity coming in with now a separation from, literally a separation of the audit line of business into a separate entity, with the audit models in fact moving across to be employees or to be owners of the non-audit firm. So they're seeing a bit of a trend there, and they're really just quite concerned as to the direction this is going. So just wanted to share a bit of the flavor as to what we're hearing.
Thanks, Ken.
Back to you, Gabriela.
You've just made Gabriela leave with 15 minutes now to deliver the last bits of the presentation. Gabriela, can we try and cover the CFO and the Part 4B, please, in the time that's left? Thanks.
I see yes, Robert has his hand raised.
Robert,
sorry,
yes,
just thank you. Robert? Just a quick comment. Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Ken and Gabriela, for that explanation. I just wanted to observe that this is possibly a very interesting case study in terms of how a public interest issue emerges. So all credit to the IESBA for putting the issue out there. And then it seems as if it's getting its own legs, and having the insurance industry as a sort of an outlier normally coming into the frame, and as you say, Ken, looking at the issues from a high level perspective is extremely helpful. So I think this is a very useful briefing for this board, and it'll be very helpful in terms of the decisions that the IESBA makes in taking this forward. It's clearly not something which you should be rushing on. I think it's probably useful just to let the feedback continue to come in and take a strategic approach to it, which of course will then flow into your strategic work plan. So I hope that comment is useful. I know that I speak for all my colleagues in saying that we think it's very important to keep this issue very much on the agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Valuable input. Back to you, Gabriela.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'll try to be as quick as possible going through the last slides. So if and then for the next slide, please. So basically, we just wanted to give you the PIOB an idea of the projects that we are initiating, the new projects, which terms of reference were approved in September, and they were all in our strategy and work plan for 24-27. And it's on the new role of CFOs. It's the sustainability for the sustainability assurance engagements outside the scope of the IESA, and the two PIRs, the two post-implementation reviews, one on NOCLA and the other on the restructured code. 2 words about each one of these projects. I mean, the slides have been distributed. If you have questions, happy to respond. The role of CFOs, so the role of CFOs is changing significantly, and is changing significantly not only because CFOs are being allocated with other responsibilities, new areas such as, for instance, sustainability and etc., but also technology is impacting their role, and this means that we need to test if these CFOs are currently, as PIIBs, are currently still enough equipped with ethics and standards in the code to face these new responsibilities. Also, together with these new responsibilities come also opportunities, because, for instance, just the fact that they are being impacted by technology means that in many times they are being left with more time and more space to be more involved in strategic thinking, strategic action in companies, and etc. And this is making a lot of questions being raised about the relationship between CFO and the board, their responsibilities, their decision-making power. And because traditionally they were more considered as reviewers of the financial information, there was not that much decision there, but growingly they are involved in the governance, decision-making, strategy, governance, etc. And when decision-making grows, the ethics and questions grow as well. So this is really about testing if they are still well equipped, if the standards still are still resilient in face of all these changes, but also address or see if there is anything that we should do with respect to the CFOs who are not accountants. And the proportion seems to be significant, but that's something that we will better understand in this first phase of the project. We have already launched a survey, a very comprehensive pulse survey within CFOs. We had a very significant number of responses. I don't dare saying the number, but I think it was very much above 100, which is already a significant sample. It was interesting to see all the CFOs, all those CFOs from different jurisdictions responding to this pulse survey, and it will allow us to move forward with more fact-finding, understanding the reality over the next 12 months or so. It is in the public interest to see if this first line of defense that CFOs and PIIBs really are still prepared to play their role in terms of fighting or being against protecting the corporate misconduct and the public interest. Next slide, please. Then if you can move, please. I'm not going to. Oh, sorry, I have Chair. There is a question from. Should I stop?
There is a question from Mark, I note. Mark?
Yeah.
Gabriella, why don't you carry on with your presentation and I'll ask my question at the end so that you get through everything.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. So the second
Mark.
project. Sorry, the second project that we are initiating is something that was already in our plans as well, and it is the sustainability-related standards for the sustainability assurance engagements outside the scope of the IESA. So as you will remember, the scope of the IESA, of our sustainability assurance ethics standards for sustainability assurance, had a very limited scope. So all the rest was falling and is falling outside of this coverage that we prepared. There were questions, namely from the PIOB, very insistent about when and how fast would we develop a similar framework for the sustainability assurance engagements outside of the scope of the IESA, namely, but not only, to make it or not profession agnostic, just like the IESA. So this is the work that we are starting now. The heavy lift has been done with the IESA, so the concepts that we needed to refine, adjust, make fit for purpose, the examples and etc. There is a lot of material there where we don't need to touch now, but it's really to see what we need to do for the rest of the sustainability engagements, which are not in the scope of the IESA, which became even more relevant because when we developed the IESA, the perspective was that the mandatory sustainability assurance was going to grow and grow and grow. And in 6 months, the reality is completely different now. Not only it was already reduced in Europe, US, the perspectives and etc., but there may be a good chance that the mandatory assurance will be much less relevant or significant than we were expecting. And in that case, the sustainability assurance engagements outside of the scope of the IESA will be much more numerous, and they will, of course, require, to our view, dedicated attention to see if there is something that we should do and if this is something that the profession agnostic approach should also be there or not. This requires a lot of fact-finding to understand exactly who is doing what in each jurisdiction, how relevant these non-PAs are in sustainability assurance engagements outside of the scope of the IESA, and after this fact-finding and research, we will decide what to do. And finally, next 2 slides, I think, 3, one more, please. So the PIR, the post-implementation reviews, they were also on our agenda. You may recall or not that in July, I informed the PIOB board that we had decided to anticipate a little bit these PIRs, namely the restructured code. And this PIR on the restructured code, this anticipation results from the fact that there were many comments from stakeholders about the complexity of the code and the length of the code and blah, blah, blah. So the reasons why this PIR should be done are the same that we had planned, but we decided to anticipate it and to do it together with the PIR on NOCLAR. NOCLAR is a very, very important standard, which has been creating some issues in some jurisdictions because there are legal obstacles, because there are difficulties, and etc. So it's very important, and that's what the Stakeholder Advisory Committee told us, that this was a priority, really, because we need to understand how consistently they are being understood and implemented, and if they are really achieving the intended purposes in developing the standards, which is, of course, to contribute to the fight against financial crime and similar situations. So we need to determine what actions. The work is already advancing, developing. We are planning to issue a survey by the start of 2026. Of course, we will need to see if we can do all these things at the same time, because there are some surveys to be put out of in the market, plus the FCG. We may need to resequence some of the work, but for the time being, the plan is to launch a survey by the start of next year. And I will stop here, Chair. I know that I skipped some slides, but of course, happy to respond to any question or go back to any of the slides that I did not address if there are some questions or need for clarification.
Thanks, Gabriela. I do take note that the board would have gone through the slides anyway in advance. So I guess I should open up for questions. Mark, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jago. And thanks, Gabriela, for your presentation. I just had some comments on the role of the CFO project. I'd be very interested to see the feedback that you've actually got from the 100 or so CFOs who've responded to your survey. But I mean, there really is nothing new about CFOs or finance directors, as we used to call them, having roles much beyond financial reporting. I mean, you know, when I first started in industry nearly 40 years ago, you know, finance directors were responsible for treasury, tax, M&A transactions, other transactional negotiations, etc., and IT typically. It's not really, there's not really a sort of a greater widening of the scope of a CFO's role. And for those CFOs who are professional accountants, you know, they will be governed, will have ethical guidance from their institutes or organizations around the world. And for those CFOs who are not accountants, of course, locally you'll have corporate governance requirements. Major companies will have their own corporate general ethical policies on which their staff will have to undergo training, and that would include the senior finance staff, and I can say that from experience. So I really wonder whether this is needed, and I also wonder whether there could be a bit of mission creep here. You know, remind you that IESBA is primarily for accountants. I know we had to look at sort of profession agnostic requirements in the area of sustainability, but that of course was to create a level playing field for accountants and non-accountants. I really would counsel against focusing specifically on CFOs, whether they be accountants or non-accountants. But by the same token, would absolutely support, you know, ethical guidance for accountants in business generally, which I believe we already have.
Thanks, Mark. Gabriela, let me move on to Robert, and then you can respond thereafter. Robert?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to come in again. I'd like to just reinforce what Mark's just said, Gabriela. I am very much supportive personally of this project being undertaken as a fact-finding project, but it's not necessarily, I think, an ethical project. I think, you know, it's. I've been an in-house general counsel, and I've worked with CFOs. And you know, general counsel and CFOs both have professional obligations to the entity and legal context, the entity which is your client. You have professional obligations which arise there, and they're not necessarily ethical ones, and this is where the risk of sort of some sort of scope creep might come in. So I just wanted to reinforce, I think, what Mark said, that there's clearly a bit of a minefield here. There's a risk of confusing ethical responsibilities with broader sort of professional responsibilities, and I'm sure you'll be aware of all of this as well. That's not to say that the work shouldn't be done, in my view. I think it's very important to look at this. One point which has come up significantly in our private discussions has been the point, which I wasn't aware of previously, that a lot of CFOs will actually deregister themselves when they get into a CFO position, because they don't want to be subject to professional oversight. And I think that's a very important issue to look at, because if that is the case, then that may not be in the interest of the entity or in the broader public interest, how we define it. So just to comment on that, I think it's a very important project to keep pursuing, but just it is going to be very important for the board to bear in mind some of the risks associated with it. I just wanted also just to reinforce the importance of the NOCLAR post-implementation review. You said that this is very important. It's very significant and good to hear that the SAC has encouraged you to bring forward this review and to undertake it. This was, of course, a signature project of your predecessor, and a huge amount of work went into the development of the NOCLAR framework, and we know that there are problems with adoption and implementation across jurisdictions, and that inconsistency is a significant problem. Some of those barriers are legislative ones, aren't they? Where you've got a legislative prohibition on breaching confidentiality, and others are more nuanced than that. But I just very much support that work being done, and we'll certainly be interested to see what the results that come out, what the results are that come out of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. And I think you made an important point about the CFO project, that even us as PIOB need to reflect, I think, further on that, to then come up with those public interest issues that we may want to put forward to Gabriela and team to think about. Gabriela, please, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mark and Robert, for this advice. Of course, this is something that we have been also reflecting upon. So we need to be aware of the need to keep the project within the boundaries and the limits of the ethical perspective where we will need to put it. Of course, with all the elements that we will need to take on board to evaluate if the ethical support is there for these new CFOs. Now, just one or two comments specifically about something that a few things that I heard. Yes, so to your question, Mark, the responses to the survey were made public in the board meeting papers. So at least the analysis of these responses, and the responses were very factual. It's a pulse survey. Do you have an ethics code? Are you supported? Do you feel that when you need to make a decision, you are enough supported? And the responses are very interesting, because not all of them, and far from that, say that they feel supported. And many of them, or at least a significant number, say that they would need something more. This is the first thing. Secondly, yes, part of them say, yes, we have a code of ethics of this, or you have a conduct code here and there. But exactly, I think that the role of the IESBA, when necessary, and of course we are in the fact-finding phase. We are not saying that we are going to do this or that. But the IESBA role is actually to, when possible and needed, to try to reduce the level of fragmentation and individual codes, because this is the argument in many other situations. It was the same with sustainability. Everyone had a code of ethics for sustainability, the engineers, the dentists, the consultants, etc. So our role is exactly to try to set, when necessary and possible, international standards which are uniform and more or less the same to everyone. Of course, all those traps, I think it's the word that you mentioned, are more than real, and thank you for bringing them again. We will need to see all the corporate governance environment and how it influences this reality and etc. But that's the work that we will be doing over this first year, is exactly to collect information, knowledge, understanding, and then see what and if we can do something which is, of course, within our mandate and objective, and identifying, which has already started very clearly, the public interest considerations that we need to address when developing or working on this project.
Thanks, Gabriela. Maybe this point in time is good to circle back to Tom, because I did see your hand up earlier. Did you want to come in on the firm culture and governance? Just so we can close off this topic on Gabriela and go into the joint session. Tom?
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. But I think that I can discuss that a little bit later. So not this time. Thank you.
No problem. Ken?
I'll be very brief, Chego. The analysis of the pulse survey we did of the CFOs is available in agenda item 3C of our September board meeting on our board's website. So I don't know if somebody from the PIOB team could forward that to Mark, or I can do that. I can forward that to Nerea or Martin, and then if you could share that with Mark, you'll see all the details in the agenda paper. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. And let me take the opportunity to also thank you and Gabriela for giving us updates from your last meeting, and clearly what's shaping out what the strategic work plan would look like as it firms up over time. So thank you for that.